Hello. Analog horror has been taking the world of YouTube by storm. Well, it soared to popularity with things like like the Mandela Catalog in 2021. What is considered the original analog horror is No Through Roads from 2009. Analog horror has also gotten its fair share of controversy. And when it comes to controversy, no series is as derided as The Painter. More commonly known by you folks as UrbanSPOOK, I'm not going to sit here and talk about everything you've probably heard. If you're watching this video, you're likely very aware of all of this series' problems. So today we're going to be talking about something far more specific. Hello everybody, and welcome. Well, not back, but welcome to my very first video essay. I want to preface this video with some particular caveats. Neither of us are experts in criminology, criminal justice, psychology, or any of their connected fields. I've taken a few classes in each, most of which were high school level, but a few college courses as well. So while we did a lot of research in the psychology of serial killers, criminology, criminal profiling, and everything else, we may get some information incorrect. And if that is the case, feel free to correct us. Secondly, we put timestamps on the video, so if a section doesn't interest you, feel free to skip around as needed. I know that's bad YouTuber etiquette or whatever, but I don't care. Do what makes the most sense to you. I will also say full stop before we start anything. Don't harass Urban Slug. I don't care what he said or done on Twitter. This video is not about that. If I find out you harassed him on Twitter, I will be blocking you. I know I'm a small YouTuber, but that doesn't give me a pass to be an asshole. The reason we're making this video is simple enough. When watching both The Painter ourselves and other people's coverage, it didn't make sense to us. This stems almost exclusively from our shared love of the show Criminal Minds, a show about serial killers and their pathology. So the thesis statement of the video is thus. UrbanSPOOK doesn't make sense as a serial killer story. So, I'll keep this brief, but everyone needs context for this series. The Painter follows a wildly incompetent police force trying to chase after a serial killer who paints all of their victims seemingly before the actual events. The first episode is called Faces, where the police find 3 paintings, all of which are named after recent murders. While we won't be going over the murders in detail yet, this is the first time we see these paintings, named after each of the victims, and they somehow lead to the police finding these victims. At the end of the video, we learn that they found an additional 7 paintings, all named after victims we learn about later, including you. This one right here, you. But none of that matters because the end of the video gives us the self-portrait of the killer. The art is done well for our first look at the killer, but I still don't think it was a great decision. However, opinions aside, episode 2 is up next, known as The Lighthouse, and it amps up the disturbing shock horror, focusing on Bill Collins, a police officer who goes missing alongside his family, including a 2-month-old baby. And yeah, that baby is not happy and healthy. They then come across a titular lighthouse where they find more bodies, including the charred corpse of a missing teenager and the ground-up bodies of the rest of the family in a barrel. Each episode kind of ramps up in this way. Episode 3 is what I would consider the point of no return. Mind you, this is the episode where a child's jam and a brick is shoved down a little girl's throat. Even though the episode has a really cool section with a picture of the killer, it's tainted by everything else. I'm just gonna rush through to the big twist, since we'll be going into detail later, but we find out that there are actually two distinct killers, both of which paint their victims and commit gruesome murders. This was hinted at in the 4th episode, and the community was theorized that for a little bit, but I'm not the only one who feels this way. I think Urban Slug decided to do this primarily just to cover his own ass. Especially considering we don't get this confirmation until the 7th episode. Regardless, two killers make things either easier or far more complex, depending on how you want to look at it. And while we'll get into that, there's something else we need to discuss first. Okay, this is just my autism, but this series gives us a lot of specific time frames, and considering that time frames matter when it comes to serial killers, we should nail this down. So I made two timelines, one using the exact language used by Urban Slug, and the second one I call the Machete timeline. Named after the Machete order for viewing Star Wars, it reorders the events so that they make a little bit of sense. Well, this is the timeline I'll be using for the rest of the video, because it actually makes sense, we should go over the official timeline. So, the original timeline doesn't make a lot of sense, as I was saying, but the oldest date we currently have is 6 months ago, which is when the first batch of 3 paintings are found. These 3 paintings are named after recent murders. However, we don't know if these paintings were made prior to the murders or afterwards at this point. We also know that Daniel went missing long ago, but considering we don't know what the fuck that means, we're assuming he went missing in the 2 months in between the paintings being found. 4 months ago, 7 more paintings are found. Amongst these are Daniel's, Cory's, remember that, and Tom's, as well as few for the victims that we haven't heard about since, like with Jennifer. We then jump to 4 weeks ago, which is when the opening events of the lighthouse take place. This is where Bill goes missing. 12 days later is when they find Daniel's body, as well as the remains of Officer Bill and his family. 2.5 weeks ago is when Cory runs into one of the killers in a shack on Tiger Lake. Wait, so if Cory's painting was found 4 months ago, why did Cory only run into the killer 2.5 weeks ago? In all honesty, I can't tell you. I can't. This makes 0 sense. Unless the killer was, like, stalking Cory for a while, it makes no sense why his close encounter happened so long after the painting has been made and found. Now, with the Machete timeline I'll talk about in a minute, the order of events makes a lot more sense, at least to some degree. Okay, 10 days ago, that's when the Beck twins go missing, and this, once again, doesn't make sense. If the killer only waited a week in between the close encounter and the kidnapping, it doesn't make sense why it took 4 months in between the paintings and the killing. We then go forward to only 1 week ago, which is when Tom Harris's body is found. Which is fine, but we need to talk about the elephant in the room. If you've been paying attention, we're only on tape 4. And there's only 1 week of time in between the events of tape 4 and the nebulous now? So when is now? Well, we don't know. No, not really. We know the series takes place longer than 6 months ago, based on the fact that the description of these videos say that these were VCR tapes being converted to digital. So now does not mean when the videos are released. So we have to assume that the now is during the events of the latest tape, which at the time of writing is episode 8. However, the way the time frames are written, we're going to be doing a lot of assumptions. So the events of tape 4 are next. This is when Sean Kane goes missing and his respective painting is found. 3 days prior to tape 5 is when Tina Rosenberg, her sister, and boyfriend are reported missing. 2 days prior is when Flora is killed, Jack goes missing, and Tina manages to survive. This is when we get to the most annoying part of this timeline. The non-committal languages of tape 6, 7, and 8. Tape 6 only says that Ian Ford went missing recently. Recently. We have no frame of reference for what this means, but if they went missing recently, we can say it happened shortly before the events of tape 6, which is where Ian Ford's body, alongside his families, are found, and the painters decide to say ACAB and do random social commentary that is more ham-fisted than people's worst assumptions about the Saw franchise. Tape 7 uses similar non-committal language, saying that the murder of Isabella and Bruce happened over the past few days. The other events of tape 7 aren't particularly noteworthy, but we finally ended off with tape 8, which does have more committed language than the previous episodes, but still not really committed language. They once again say that the Nerders have picked up over the past few weeks, which is when we come in, when the murder of Dr. Fred Baker is revealed. This murder is found out because he didn't come into work, so we know the body is relatively fresh. 2 days later is when George White is found, which does show us that the kills are coming up far quicker than usual. But this is followed up by the events of last night, which is when Sarah Stone and her husband are kidnapped, and we get this really nasty looking footage of the killers. This all culminates in the events of Tape 8 being our modern day. Which I can live with, but you guys see why this timeline doesn't work, right? I'm not the only one who sees it, right? So that's where the Machete timeline comes into play. The Machete timeline is my version of the timeline, where some events are reordered to better fit with the few numbers we are given. So assuming that Tape 8 being the latest in the series would also be the latest in the timeline, we can jump back to 6 months ago. This is the same as the original timeline, including the disappearance of Daniel happening in this block of time. So are the events of 4 months ago. In total, the 11 paintings are found, 10 of which being of victims, either recently murdered or coming up, and a self-portrait of the killer. So here is when the first major deviation happens. Sometime in the span of 4 to 5 months ago is when Cory runs into the killer. We have to assume that this happened either shortly before or shortly after the paintings are found, because that's the only way this killer makes any sort of sense. A week later is when the events of episode 3 take place. This is the murder of the Beck twins, the paper mill, all that jazz. Somewhere between 1 and 4 months ago is when the events of episode 4 take place. This is the murder of Tom Harris and the disappearance of Sean Kane, and this really doofy fucking painting. I love this painting. We have to assume that this is also shortly after the 7 additional paintings are found, because Tom's painting was alongside Cory's. We then get into 6 weeks ago, where the opening events of Tape 4 take place. 4 weeks ago is when Daniel's body and the moist barrel are found. 3 weeks ago is when the events of the 5th tape takes place. Then 2 weeks ago is when Ian Ford is reported missing and the events of Tape 6 take place. 1 week ago is when Isabella's murder and Tape 7 take place. And then over the last week, the events of Tape 8 are going on. Specifically, they would go as follows. Around 5 to 7 days ago is when... And then over the last week, the events of Tape 8 are going on. Specifically, they go as follows. 5 to 7 days ago is when Dr. Fred Baker's body is found, when he doesn't show up to work. Then 3 to 5 days ago, when they find George White's body. And subsequently, last night, when Sarah and Michael are kidnapped. All leading up to now, which is when Tape 8 was created. Now, all of this can be blown up by the next episode dropping, but if we assume that the final tape is the latest in the timeline, this is the only way the timeline makes any sort of logical sense, with the numbers we're given at least. Sure, we can assume 2 extra months or longer have passed in between the filming of Tape 1 and the filming of Tape 8, but that makes a lot of things make even less sense, because some painting victims still haven't been found. There were 11 paintings at the 4 months ago situation, and I think there's still 2 victims we don't know about. So assuming that 8 months have passed, blows everything up too. So I have to apologize to you guys here. I spent all this time talking about the summary of the series and this timeline no one cares about. We're already 15 minutes in, and we haven't even talked about the actual serial killer stuff. So to all those still watching, it's time to jump into that. So this section should be relatively short, but we need to classify what kind of killer these two are. Sure, they're supposedly serial killers, but do they even fit that definition? Or can we find something else more fitting for their style? So Webster's defines serial killer as...
Stop! Don't do that.
Okay, so for this video, this definition... Right, so for this video, the definition we're using for serial killer is as follows. A person who commits a series of murders, often with no apparent motive, and a characteristic, predictable behavior pattern. While that's a bit wordy, it does encapsulate what most people describe as a serial killer. Now, there's only there's one specific wordage there that makes most people disqualify the painters as serial killers, and that's the characteristic predictable behavior pattern. But I had to push back on this a little bit. Whilst it's not typical, their commitments to painting each of their victims either shortly before or shortly after their murder would fit under this definition broadly. Either shortly before or shortly after their murder would fit under this definition. I should do the full sentence, actually. But I have to push back on this a little bit. Whilst it's not typical, their commitments to painting each of their victims either shortly before or shortly after their murder would fit under the definition broadly.
1.
But
Blair, what if they're a spree killer?
Jesus, Socky. Don't scare me like that. But actually, I do have to applaud you on your usage of your criminal mind's vocabulary cards. Insert image here.
I only have one. They can't be a spree killer.
Jesus, you too? God, okay, well, explain to the good people why they're not spree killers.
Simple enough, Brosive. Spree killers do 2 or more kills with either no cooling off period or a very small one.
Wow! So that means since they have a long period in between their murders, that means they can't be spree killers?
That's correct, Socky. By the power invested in me, the president of the Matthew Gray Goobler Fan Club, I dub you a criminologist.
That's not how that works. Get out of my chair. Let me finish this video. Go. Get out of here. But there's something you learn when you look into serial killers. There's different kinds of serial killers. So we need to narrow that down. We can throw out the first type. These are known as the visionary. These ones suffer psychotic breaks from reality and believe they're either another person or compelled to murder by God or a demon. But considering there's no biblical or religious imagery in this series, like, at all, we can assume this isn't the case. Then you have the mission-oriented murderer. These guys typically justify their actions as ridding the world of certain types of people. You know what that means. Whilst the painters have some sort of social commentary edge in episode 6, it's not a common theme in their murders. They could be hedonistic murderers, I hear you say. These ones seek thrills and derive pleasure from their kills. They're usually motivated either by lust, where sexual fantasies are fulfilled by the murders, thrill, where it means to induce a sense of terror in their victims, or profit, where they're motivated by material gain. However, while there are some forms of sexual misconduct in a few of the murders, it's not a common theme. Neither are the other two, from what we can tell, so we can throw these out. And whilst they've killed a few police officers by this point, they're not technically cop killers, since that's not their main victim. The best fit seems to be the disorganized serial killer. According to the Office of Justice Programs, or OJP, a disorganized serial killer is likely to be of below-average intelligence, is socially inadequate, and sexually incompetent. Facial destruction and sexually sadistic acts performed after the murder are also typical. Now, while this does sound right, there's a part of this quote that I omitted, and it goes as follows. The crime scene shows that the crime was committed suddenly, with no set plan of action for deterring detection. Now, while the killers seemingly want the bodies to be found, these murders seem to be planned out pretty heavily in advance, considering the paintings of Cory, Tom, and Daniel being found long before the bodies have. So the actual best fit is a mixed serial traits of the disorganized killer and their opposite, the organized serial killer. Who could have saw that one coming? The OJP defines them as follows. Average or above average intelligence and poor work performance, socially adept and usually living with a partner. May report an angry state of mind prior to the murder. The crime scene shows a semblance of order before, during, and after the offense. The victim frequently is a stranger and may be targeted because he or she is in a particular location or has certain characteristics. Obsessive-compulsive traits surface in the organized murderer's behavior and crime scene patterns. Now, there's a lot more about organized serial killers, like a lot more. But you can see why a combination of the two fits them the best, especially since we don't really have much of a motive for them. But now that we know what kind of killer they are, we can determine Yeah. But now that we know what kind of killer they are, and we can't determine why they kill, we need to determine where they kill. I promise this is relevant. So I wasn't kidding when I said we need to discuss where the series takes place. So let's find out together, why don't we? We don't have a lot of data on where the series takes place, but we do have a singular location, to our knowledge. In episode 3, we learned that Cory ran into the first killer while at Tiger Lake. When you look up Tiger Lake, the first thing you find is this fucking Intel processor, and that's irrelevant. But oh, what's this? Where is it?
There it is.
Yeah, I think this is the one. Yeah. But that's irrelevant. Oh, what's this? Tiger Lake, Florida. I mean, we don't see a lot about the locations or anything, but the series does scream. The series does scream Florida Man to me, honestly. You know, so the only other major landmark we know of is the landmark. So the only other major landmark we know of is episode 2's titular lighthouse, right? So I'm gonna use this site here. I found this the other day. US Beacons. This website lets you look up lighthouses by zip code, and the zip code of Tiger Lake in Florida. Zip code. Come on, can you give it to me, please? $32,563. This is not exact, but this will give me a general idea. Wide as we can go. Oh, there actually is one. This changes thing. Okay. So using this site here, it's called US Beacons. We can search up lighthouses by zip code. The zip code of Tiger Lake in Florida is 33898, according to my notes. Let's look it up. And, oh, look at that. No lighthouses around for 60 miles. Well, that's not good. Okay, well, when you look up Tiger Lake on Google Maps... when you look up Tiger Lake on Google Maps, you see this, Tiger Lake, Washington. Well, I mean, Tiger Lake did seem to be in some sort of, like, foresty area, so I guess that would make sense. Well, same process here. The zip code for Tiger Lake, Washington is this one, 98528. Let's go back a little bit. 98528. Same 60-mile radius. Come on. Closest one is this one. Gig Harbor Lighthouse. Well, what's Gig Harbor Lighthouse? Oh, this is about 27 miles away. That's about 44 kilometers for my metric system users. This would take about 37 minutes in a car. And 11 hours on foot? And based on all the info we have, they would be traveling on foot. It's quite a large kill zone, but it's definitely doable. But you have missed your cue.
It's good. It's fine.
So, unless it's quite a large kill zone, it's definitely doable.
It's too late still. Okay. And
Well, it's quite a large kill zone. It's definitely doable.
yeah, you know there's a phone number in the first episode, right?
There's a what in the who?
Yeah, the number for the police. It's like in the first episode. It's even the channel banner. How'd you miss that?
Whatever.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Yeah, episode 1 has a phone number for the police. It's even the channel banner. How'd you miss that?
I don't know.
Well, that's the only other concrete data we have on the series' location. What is the phone? What? It's a phone number? It says it's a channel banner. 985. What is the 985 area code? 85 area code. Southeastern Louisiana, excluding the inner ring of the New Orleans area. Homa. Homa. Oh, okay. Is there a Tiger Lake in Louisiana? I could spell right, that would help. Tiger Lake, Louisiana. There's a lake. There is indeed a Tiger Lake. A lake in Louisiana, that's what it says. Okay. Interesting. Where is that in relation to Homa, though? Back to Google Maps, yes. If I could spell, that would be helpful. Tiger Lake, Louisiana. What is that in reference to Homa, I wonder? Homa, Louisiana. 167 miles? Or 270 kilometers. That's an impossibly large kill zone. Especially if both of them are... If both these killers are operating on foot, too. Like, what? That's a 3-hour drive. What the fuck? Why? What? I don't get it. I don't... Is there even... Is there even any fucking lighthouses nearby to Tiger Lake? What's Tiger Lake's zip code? Like, no, they won't even tell me. Lovely. Take me to Tiger Lake. It just says Louisiana. It just says... Okay, down here. Is there like a building nearby that I can... Is there like a building nearby I can like use a reference? Oh, there's a church. That's close enough. Church have a zip code 71367. Go back to US beacons. Maybe they'll be able to help. That's not a 71367. 60-mile radius. Is there any fucking lighthouses near Tiger Lake? No? Well, of course not. Why would there be? Why would there be? Doesn't make any goddamn sense. Well, shit. I mean, there is one other final landmark I guess we get to look at. An abandoned paper mill. Is there an abandoned paper mill near Homa? Homa. Abandoned paper mill. Valentine paper mill. That might actually be something. Lock. Where is this in reference to Homa, I wonder? Valentine paper mill. I can't spell, that would help. Oh, okay, that's really close. It's actually only about 30 minutes outside of Homa. Although, still a 9-hour walk. That's a big jump. It's a big jump. I don't understand, guys. I really don't. So let's talk about the elephant in the room here. Let's talk about the elephant in the room here. If their kill zone is this massive, how the hell does this make any sort of sense? That's where I have to bring up a very specific subset of serial killers. Often called a traveling serial killer, these type of serial killers usually fall into one of three categories. They live in an RV or otherwise travel in their daily life. They work a job, like a trucker, where traveling seems to be the most important thing for their work. Or, what is most likely in this situation, they're homeless. Or are otherwise living a transient lifestyle. All of the information we have regarding these two killers seems to imply they're homeless. Especially the long-haired one, considering it seems like they're walking around barefoot. They also seem to walk everywhere, because the video footage we do have seems to imply they're walking places, and we see no notices of cars or bikes, or anything else that they seem to be working with. So sure, their inconsistent kill zone can work, but something about traveling serial killers is that they don't stick in one place for very long. But lo and behold, they seem to be constantly in and around Homa, because we don't see any notices of other police forces, other police numbers, or even a change of location like a desert or a mountainous setting. So why would they travel from Tiger Lake to Homa and then stay in Homa? It's not like they have the MO of doing massive sprees in one location and moving on, or if they do, it's mentioned nowhere in the series. And if we look back at the timeline, they have to have been in the Homa area for at least 6 months, because that's when the original 3 paintings are found. So this doesn't make any sense. Are we just to assume that the painters went on a vacation to Tiger Lake and just so happened to run into Cory, who also just so happens to live in their typical kill zone, and they somehow find him and his twin sister in the town? Did they follow the family home from Tiger Lake? And this is actually the earliest event in the timeline, which is why Cory's painting is found within the 4-month time span? I don't know. The more we find out about this series, the less this makes any sort of sense. So let's talk about something short and simple to help me calm down. So this was an interesting section to write, to say the least. I even had to make a whole spreadsheet for it. Here's the spreadsheet. Which was not a particularly easy thing to sit and do. Victimology, for those of you who are unaware, is typically defined as the study of victims and the patterns, consequences, and responses to victimization. Now, some theories do break down what victimology can be. Some believe it's based entirely on where a person lives, especially if it's a dangerous area. This is known as the deviant place theory. Another theory suggests someone may target a victim because of their lifestyle. This is called lifestyle theory. Saying that someone with a gambling problem may be an easy victim for a con artist. Finally, there's a victim precipitation theory. That unironically, at least according to Grand Canyon University's website, is that the characteristics of a victim may precipitate the crime, which to me sounds very victim-blamey, but that's just me. Using the simplified model put forward by Psychology Today, there's a few things we can determine a killer based entirely on their victims. So what kind of victims do the painters target, and what can it tell us? There are 29 victims in the series, if you count Michael and Sarah, who aren't confirmed dead yet, but are victims of the kidnapping, Tina Rosenberg, who was targeted but survived, and both Jennifer and Lisa, who have paintings but their exact form of murder is not known. Now, obviously, the killings are not done, but this should give us a decent baseline to work with. Something we should figure out first is the gender breakdown of the victims. Let's go to the numbers. Something we should figure out first is the gender breakdown of the victims. Let's go to the numbers. There are a total of 15 women and 14 men targeted, so it's mostly 1-to-1. We know each of the victims are the main target of the crime because we see no indication of arson, theft, or other crimes. And while there are some additional crimes taking place at certain points, the murder is always the forefront. Okay, so if the gender ratio is not particularly distinct, what can we learn from the ages targeted by the killers? Well, they mostly target adults that are around their 30s. While most characters don't have official ages, most of the characters seem to be older than their early 20s. But this doesn't tell us much since most serial killers like these target this age group. Sure, there are a few more children than usual, and both infants and fetuses, for some reason. But these aren't the main victims. We can't even break down if these are high-risk or low-risk individuals, since the series doesn't give us much, if any, information for a majority of the victims. This is the biggest problem with this series for this video, because with having so few bits of information, nothing makes sense from a logical angle. None of the victims have a lot of crossover in occupation, age range, actual death. The only crossover seems to be the location of Houma, Louisiana, but as we've discussed, the kill zone of the town is much wider than a typical one, so what can it all mean? Well, there is a potential out for you, Urban Slug, if you're watching this, or have watched this far. Something that makes the victimology make, well, not sense, but it means it's not very important. Whilst I can't find anything about this being a real term in criminology, Criminal Minds introduced us to the concept of an omnivore. In simple terms, it means they don't have a typical victimology, that they'll kill just about anyone they come across, which is the only way to explain it because of such a wide berth of victims throughout the entire series. Something else that doesn't make any sense is this. Modus operandi, or in English, mode of operation. This is how a criminal does things, how they murder, where and when they murder, but most importantly, it determines why they murder. So let's break down a few things, starting with the long-haired killer. We all know them, we all hate them. They are the original killer we were introduced to. Well, I've been keeping a pretty major part of them secret from you this whole video.
I'm not being confusing, okay?
For those
I'm
of you
being
who are fans of the
mysterious.
series, you probably know this already. The long-haired killer is a woman. This was confirmed on Slug's Instagram at the end of October last year. This woman, real name Mona Lanius, is the original painter we follow for a majority of the series. Now, why does this matter? Well, women typically kill for different reasons than men, and also employ different tactics. According to Penn State, male serial killers tend to hunt their victims, who are often strangers to them. Female serial killers tend to gather their victims, targeting people around them who they may already know, often for financial gain. Now we can tell that this likely isn't the case for Mona, simply because neither Tina, the only known survivor, nor any of the people who have access to both the photos and the police number have revealed anything about this person. This does make more sense if Mona is homeless, considering she's part of a duo. That makes things a little different. Now, serial killer duos are rare, but not drastically rare. They pop up occasionally, and according to Jillian S. Leonard at the University of Houston, research shows that there is a dominant and submissive partner in each pair, which allows their killing bond to strengthen and thrive after each kill. Now, let's analyze the duo under this theory. Now, we don't know for sure who commits each murder, but we can make assumptions based on what information we have, especially if we consider the theory put forward by fellow YouTuber and inspiration behind this video, Lazy Bedhead. Their theory is that both killers are painters and they both have their own unique style behind their art, which would explain the constantly shifting art styles and premises behind each piece. So, remember that spreadsheet from earlier? Remember that spreadsheet I was talking about earlier? Well, I have this section right here, a painter section. I determined which person painted each painting. I put that on the spreadsheet. Now, this is purely for my personal interpretation of this theory. But we determined that Mona painted 13 of the 24 canonical paintings that have a confirmed victim match, whilst her partner painted 11. Now, this is based on the criteria put forward by Lazy Bedhead. Mona's paintings are the ones that have a deeper symbolism or are a bit more exaggerated in some ways, like with Jigsaw Baby or Fleshhead Fred. Whilst the other person's painting seems to be more of the victim's face right before, during, or after the murder, like with Daniel after the fire or observing Paul. If this is the case, this would imply Mona to be the more dominant partner, right? Well, not exactly. There's a good chance that Mona does most, if not all, of the paintings, whilst her partner does all the actual killing. This can be kind of seen in the latest episode, where we can hear one of the killers, whichever one it is, and they're obviously the more dominant one. Put the audio here. as they're telling the other to go get the door. Obviously, we don't know for sure which killer is speaking, but at least to me, the voice sounds masculine enough that I have to assume it's Mona's that I have to assume it's Mona's partner. And Mona also seems to be going to get the door as it stands.
Hey, you want to see a painting I made?
What? Why would I want that?
Yeah. I drew this after murdering Socky.
Well, it's something.
I also drew this one. Look at the composition, the use of color. It's quite the masterpiece if you think about it.
I've known you all of my life. There is no way you did both of those things.
I promise you I did both. I promise you I did both of those things. You can't prove me wrong. Also, we need a new editor.
No, we don't. But, as it stands, we still don't know the killer's MO. We know their signature, which, for those not in the know, this is the act that an offender does not need to do to fulfill the ultimate act of murder. This is what the paintings are. The paintings are not the MO. They are something that the murderers will do, but are not necessary, as it is implied that there are a few murders we haven't seen, based on what is considered an uptick in murders that we see in episodes 7 and 8. So what is their MO? I hear you all call and ask. Well, let's break it down. Firstly, they don't have a consistent kill method, at all. We counted at least 12 distinct murder methods done in the series. Even if you combine some of them into smaller camps, there's still at least 9 distinct styles, which is just not common at all for serial killers, the most common of which is stabbing. And we're well aware of just how many stabbings there are. 4 distinct stabbing events, but over 500 distinct stab wounds. I feel like you should put the llamas with
Carl, that kills people!
Oh.
If you didn't know, stabbings, especially multiple stabbings, are directly sexual in nature. Here's the source. Usually done by someone who is sexually incontinent. This is exemplified by the murder of George White, where 4 of the stab wounds were, how can I word this so that YouTube doesn't kill me, consummated with. We have to assume this was done exclusively by Mona's partner and not Mona, and we can also assume that most of the sexual misconduct in the series was done by the partner and not Mona. Sure, there are some similarities in each of the murders. It seems that breaking into places and or kidnapping seems to be a somewhat common theme. A lot of murders do take place in the victims' homes, but some, damn, I cannot speak. A lot of murders take place in the victims' homes, but some, like the murders of the Collins family or the Beck twins, take place at a separate landmark. So even that isn't consistent. Only 5 of the murders include facial disfiguration of any kind. And even those disfigurations aren't consistent. Some remove the teeth, others remove the whole face. Similarly, only 5 of the murders include sexual misconduct of some kind. And whilst we won't go into details, they are all distinctly different. 4 victims were drugged in some way. The Collins families with the amphetamines. Tina was drugged prior to her survival. And the horse. Dear God, the horse. So, what does this all tell us? Well, the killers don't have a consistent MO. They aren't particularly political with their killings or making statements. And the only consistency is their signature paintings. But that doesn't help us. Let's do the I'm alive. But that doesn't help us. Socky. Have him on screen. Socky, I thought you were dead.
Nothing alcohol can't fix. I'm alive. So answer the question.
Oh, well, that's a possibility, I guess. But let's walk through this together. They have a massively unlikely kill zone.
They're just traveling killers.
They don't have any consistent victimology.
Well, they're just omnivores.
And they don't have a consistent, or well, any MO.
They're atypical.
Well, then why? Why even make a serial killer story? Like, legitimately, if your focus is to do even a semi-grounded serial killer story, why not use any of the things that make a serial killer work? Why would you waste your time setting up this interesting concept just to not use it effectively at all. Like, they make zero sense. If you want to do insane, crazy murders and paintings, why not just make the killers supernatural? Why aren't they just demons? Your head. So, let me say, this was a theory put forward by my brother. He's made a few cameos in this video already. Essentially, the theory is as such. Both of the killers, Mona and her partner, aren't actually human serial killers, but rather demons taking human form. This is the only way the story makes sense, really. Since the killers don't have anything typical regarding a serial killer, this would also explain the disturbing look of both killers, since neither of them seem to look particularly human. Mona definitely looks far more human than her partner, but the self-portrait in episode 1 definitely gives off the vibe of a demonic entity, you know? The other killer definitely doesn't look human, given that the massively deformed mouth, the rake-esque body shape, and his general vibe. Sure, some believe him to be wearing a mask, but we don't really have any evidence of that, not really. Sure, they're the faces that are being nailed to the walls in the barn, but that in and of itself isn't evidence that they're wearing them as masks. They also have that weird animation where their teeth are moving, but the rest of their mouth isn't, which still isn't enough for me, but I can see where that theory comes from. Regardless, making the duo a pair of demons would have made the story work so much better. Because then you don't need to stick to the serial killer angle, because serial killers have a psychology, a reason for doing things, and why they do things the same way every time. If there was even an ounce of consistency, maybe this wouldn't be a problem, but if all you want to do is show off your art and do crazy kills, make the killer supernatural. Sure, you still get shit on for how there's no main characters, how the cops are incompetent, and how you handle Cory, but at the very least the story would make some sort of sense. Now, some people have put forward the thought process that the series is satire, or potentially it's a critique of analog horror as a genre. But Poe's Law and Occam's Razor have to make us believe that this is not the case. There is zero evidence the series is satire, especially when you consider just how defensive UrbanSPOOK is on his Twitter about the series. If this was supposed to be satire, then there's zero indication. In all reality, I wouldn't be surprised if this becomes a Daddy-O 5 situation. Wait, stick with me here. In all reality, I wouldn't be surprised if this becomes a Daddy-O 5 situation. Wait, stick with me here. So, for those out of the loop, Daddy-O 5 was a series where this dad would essentially just abuse his children on camera. And whenever he got criticism, he would defend himself. He would say that no one was being hurt, or that everything was fine, and that people were being too sensitive. However, once major criticism and possible legal action was put forward, they came forward and said that everything was fake, and that actually all the pranks were scripted. However, once major criticism and possible legal action was put forward, they came forward and said that everything was fake, and that actually all the pranks were scripted, bro. I wouldn't be surprised that once the final episode comes out, Slug comes forward and says that the series is actually satirical and a criticism of the horror industry, especially analog horror. But the internet doesn't have a 10-second memory, and we'll know he's bullshitting. Let's bring it all back to the thesis from the beginning of the video. UrbanSPOOK doesn't work as a serial killer story. I admit, doing a deep dive on this series might be a little bit stupid. I don't think UrbanSPOOK wrote this series. I don't think UrbanSPOOK wrote this series with the thought that people would do much more than watch it and move on. I don't believe that he was under the impression that people would think about his series for more than a few minutes. I think he thought people would walk away disturbed by the content and just move on. That in and of itself is an issue I have with this series. That I don't think much, if any, thought went into it. I'm not the first person to put forward the idea that the second killer twist was done mostly to cover his own ass. I'm also pretty confident that if the demon theory I put forward earlier is true, it's always going to be done, likely in the last episode, to cover his own ass. The reason the series doesn't work as a serial killer series is because UrbanSPOOK didn't write out this series as a serial killer story, but as a way to show off his art. Okay. The reason the series doesn't work as a serial killer series is because UrbanSPOOK didn't write out the series as a serial killer story, but as a way to show off his art and write shock horror. So, that was my first video essay. This concept really interested me, and I didn't even get to talk about all the stuff I wanted to talk about, like devolving or the Bill Collins theory. But I'll likely do an update video if/when the last 2 episodes come out. Apparently, UrbanSPOOK said there's going to be 10. So I want to thank Lazy Bedhead for inspiring this video. I also thought about asking them to cameo, but I have no idea where I would have put them, to be completely honest. I also want to thank Oh Heck It's Tristan for being the first video I watched on this topic. Immortal Marcus for sparking my interest in analog horror in general. My brother, of course, for introducing me to this series. And Criminal Minds. He's actually the entire reason this video was written in the first place. Also, huge thanks to Delta for editing. Swoop for hope. Yeah. Also, huge thanks to Delta for editing. Swoop for hopefully not getting mad at me for ripping her style. And of course, Wombu for being both the background music to the writing of this video and also being a massive inspiration for my style. And finally, I want to thank everyone who made it this far in the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if this interested you, tell me what you want me to talk about next. Thank you, and goodbye.